Okay, let's look at a sample CCOT essay. Here's the prompt down here. This is about Russian politics and culture. I have dates here. Remember, the continuity and change over time is very date specific. And this prompt is phrased as the extent to which they changed, which is going to leave me some flexibility in how I approach answering this. So I could say there were lots of changes. These would be my, my two body paragraphs. In which case, if I'm saying there's a lot of changes, there would be two change paragraphs. I could say it changed this way, but it had this continuity. And it's even okay for me, although it's kind of unusual, to say there were two continuities. Normally, when they're explicitly mentioning this idea of things changing, I would say the ideal situation is to have one of these happening. So let's look and see what that looks like with a specific brainstorm for this information. All right, what I did with this prompt, remember this was about Russian politics and culture, is I just wrote down, without date sorting, what I knew about politics and culture, okay? So here's a cultural one, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, right here. I knew that Prince Vladimir chose it down here. I knew some things about politics, that Prince Vladimir was an early ruler, the Mongol invasion, the participation of Russian princes, the expansion of the empire after the Mongols. I wrote something down here about trade, which might be important, although remember it's not directly related to politics and culture, although I might be able to talk about it later. I knew they started with small independent states. I wrote down it was cold in Siberia. I don't think I'm going to use this, but again, I was just brainstorming. So we're going to go to the next slide here and look at what that looks like when it's sorted by dates. Okay, so because of the prompt dates saying between 1000 and 1500, I went ahead and sorted this, and this part up here, this top one is my culture. And you can tell here I've got stuff about Christianity in every box. So this bottom one down here is my politics. So let's look at what I came up with. In 1000, it's the early stages of Russia. Prince Vladimir previously had selected Eastern Orthodox Christianity as the official religion. Now I'm looking for the middle of the time period, so the 13th century or the 1200s is somewhere in the middle. And I know that this is when the Mongols conquered Russia, and I know that Christianity is maintained as the predominant religion in there, even though they're ruled by different people. And by 1500, the Russian Empire is growing, and that it's encouraging Christianity and building churches as it expanded to the east. So I have this down as a continuity. Here's something that stayed the same for the whole time period. I'll just jump ahead and show you this is going to be a change. In 1000, they have small independent states. So Kiev, which is currently a city, I have Prince Vladimir up here, this is basically a city-state. In the middle, Russia's conquered by the Mongols, and they've lost control of these states. But that's the beginning of what I have for the end of the time period, which is a new centralized state. One of the things the Mongols do over here is introduce a more centralized form of government to Russia. So after the Mongols are overthrown, there's a new centralized state, and Moscow is its capital. So my change I'm going to describe as the development of a centralized Russian state. I'm starting with small independent states and changing to a new centralized state. So that's my continuity and change. And what I'm doing kind of here is beginning the planning of what my paragraphs are going to be about. Now we'll look at how to further plan for the essay. Here we're looking at the thesis. And this is just a reminder, these are our success criteria here for a thesis. There are 4 of them. So I need to make sure I have all these. And when I'm doing a planning like this, I like to just list them here and just make sure I'm covering all the bases. I said 4 because this is my 2-part answer right here. So place and time, and the key phrase, this comes from the prompt right here. I don't have to make this up. So I just analyzed my prompt. I got Russia and these dates and politics and culture as my key phrase. I've already identified Eastern Orthodox Christianity as my continuity and the development of a Russian state as my change. And now I need to add this reason here. So I need to think about these 2 things. And remember, it's okay for me in a thesis to have 2 different reasons, one for each of those things I've identified. if I think that they're not similar, I can have two different reasons. In this case, I thought to myself, big picture-wise, why is it that they had Christianity over that entire time period? And why is it that the Russian state developed? And I think that in both of those, there's a chance for them to have strong relations with neighboring countries. And I'll explain that more in a little bit, but that's going to be my reason. So basically, once I have these all listed here, I just have to string them all together into this sentence down here. And that's my thesis. So we're going to start with my political change, and we're going to look at what that looks like in a body paragraph. So in this part, we're focusing on what the analysis is. I took from half of my thesis that the development of the Russian state and to maintain positive relations with neighboring countries. This evidence right here is what I had in my brainstorm. So this, and this we've already talked about. Now what you need to remember is you're going to have some evidence development here. This is what we're looking for. And what you're doing when you get to this small y is just asking yourself why that happened. And why did this happen? And why did that happen? It's pretty straightforward. Why did Russia have small independent states? And I could say something like, after the fall of Rome, no authority to unite Europe. I have down here that Russia was conquered by the Mongols. Why were they conquered by the Mongols? And that might be pretty straightforward. It might be superior Mongol military. You know, the Golden Horde, the Russians did not have an advanced military and they just couldn't stop them. And then why was a new centralized state formed with Moscow as its capital? Let's focus on the centralized state part and not so much the Moscow as the capital. Why a new centralized state? To protect from future threats. And again, in this section, I'm really just using my critical thinking, my kind of common sense almost. You know, if you're Russia and you were ruled by the Mongols and viciously conquered by them and ruled by them, after you manage to conquer them, maybe there's a motivation to try and maintain some strength, some central authority, and protect yourselves. And that's why you decide we need the centralized state, because we were unable to protect ourselves from this invasion back here when we were all split up. Let's go to a different color for the big Y. So now, because I introduced this maintain positive relations up here in the topic sentence from my thesis reason, that's what I talk about down here in my big Y. And the idea is that this is a big picture analysis that covers this entire time period. It's not just a narrow thing like why did the Mongols conquer Russia? It's more of a big picture thing. Why does this development over time help them maintain positive relations with neighbors? And I can bring up here the Byzantine Empire, wanted trade partners, and a central state can coordinate this trade. I can also say that there is an opportunity to use taxation to fuel growth. The idea here is that I'm trying to come up with some arguments that I haven't mentioned yet. You know, up here I'm talking about this political uniting, I'm talking about the Mongols having a superior military, I'm talking about future threats, and this is a new thing about trade with the Byzantine Empire and taxes and political growth and things like that. I could even talk about consistent rule is going to be more stable. So that's what that body paragraph would look like, and that's kind of my thought process for planning for it. Let's look at the continuity paragraph now. Same process. I took the part of my thesis that was my continuity, which was Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and because I had just the one reason, I'm using this again. Now, if I had two reasons, I'd have a different one for this topic sentence than I did for the other one. Again, here's my evidence right here from the beginning, the middle, and the end of the time period. And it was the initial, the Prince Vladimir selected Christianity. that princes maintained Christianity, and that the empire built Christian churches as it expanded east. So same process again. Why did those things happen? Why did Prince Vladimir select Eastern Orthodox Christianity? Well, he studied many religions, and because he preferred it. He thought it was the best example, the best path for his people to take. Now, I'm thinking about why he selected it. One of the things that's occurring to me is that there is a possible connection with the Byzantine Empire. That because the Byzantine Empire was also Eastern Orthodox Christian, that maybe Prince Vladimir selected to try to, connect with those guys, get some wealth, get some trade, get some protection, all those things. And that's a good point. But when I look down here at my positive relations with neighbors, I think I need to save that for down here. And part of this process is to make sure that you're not stepping on your own toes later. So I'm not going to use this yet. I'm going to stick with this thing about just Prince Vladimir preferring it, which in my mind, again, is more of this idea of a small y. It's kind of a narrow thing about this particular piece of evidence. Moving on to the Mongols, why did they maintain Christianity? I think it's personal belief. Because a lot of Russians saw the Mongol invasion as a punishment from God, then that in some cases would strengthen their belief in Christianity because it would renew their commitment to their faith and to being good Christians because they're trying to please God again. So I'll just put a note here. I would say all those points in an essay, but I'll just kind of try to summarize it for the purposes of this video here with desire to please God. And then with the building Christian churches as expanded east, why would they do that? Again, I could talk about this relation with neighbors Byzantine Empire, but I don't want to yet. So I think instead I'll say something about creating cultural unity. You're trying to create a central state, and you're trying to link all these people together. And if you look in your book at the map of Russia expanding, it's a huge expansion. It becomes the largest land empire in history. And so there's a lot of different ethnic groups that are going to be united under this empire. And if you have a common culture like Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and if that's part of your expansion process, it's going to help you rule. So I'll just make a note here to help rule. All right, now I'm going to switch colors to look at the big Y. And again, we're talking about positive relations with neighbors. So I can kind of make this point again that I had done earlier about the Byzantine Empire. So I'm going to make a note that the Byzantine Empire was Orthodox Christian, that there's a desire for positive relations, and that a common religion will help with that. I'm kind of running out of room. I think this needs a little bit more development here. What that means, desire for positive relationships. We're talking about trade. We're talking about political protection. We're talking about security from invasion. And that is my plan for my second body paragraph. And that's really what the process is when I'm planning for a CCOT. So I'm just going to go back and review that real quick. So just to review, I have a brainstorm where I kind of put down everything I know about the prompt. Then I sort it by date, and I try to identify a continuity and a change as I'm doing that process. I determine what my reason is for the continuity and the change, and I write a thesis. And then I go through this process of asking myself these questions about the small y and the big Y. And with the exception of the context, which I think is a different skill we'll talk about later, that's the entire essay. Thank you and happy writing.